How many times have you found yourself worrying about something that never happened? The human mind, as remarkable as it is, has a fascinating tendency to project distant futures, often filled with fears and anxieties. These projections, however, rarely materialize, and yet we consume ourselves with them, often without even realizing it. It's interesting how worries, which could be seen as mere possibilities, take on life in our minds as if they were already realities. This leads us to a paradox. We spend so much time living in the future that we forget to live in the present. Worrying, in essence, is a phenomenon that occurs within our heads, but the impact it has on our bodies and lives is very real. The Buddhist philosopher, Buddha, once said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." When our minds focus on negative, hypothetical scenarios, we end up creating a version of the future that frightens us, instead of simply living the life unfolding before us. By projecting these problems, we forget that the present moment is the only space where we can truly act. This is where Eastern philosophy helps us understand the relationship between the mind and worrying. It teaches us that many of our afflictions arise from our inability to fully live in the now. What affects us aren't just the real difficulties, but mainly those that our minds create. And by living in an imagined future, we distance ourselves from the beauty and peace the present moment offers. So, what would happen if, instead of worrying about problems that don't yet exist, we chose to turn our attention to what we can actually control, the now? What if the answer to our struggles wasn't to find solutions for future problems, but simply to stop living in them? In the next chapter, we will explore how a fundamental concept in Eastern philosophy, that of impermanence, can help ease our tendency to worrying about the future. The concept of impermanence anicca, in Buddhist philosophy, there is a fundamental principle that states, everything is impermanent. This concept, called anicca, teaches us that nothing in the universe remains the same for long. From the happiest moments to the most difficult ones, everything is in constant change. This understanding helps us realize that our worries, fears, and anxieties are also temporary, even though our minds often try to convince us they are eternal. If we think about it, the worries we carry often have an eternal quality. Even when they are small, they seem to grow in our minds, as if they were endless problems. The truth, however, is that everything, including our emotions and thoughts, is temporary. This transience is something we don't usually connect with in our daily lives, but when we begin to realize that what we feel today won't necessarily be what we feel tomorrow, the pressure of worrying begins to diminish. Imagine that you are having a particularly difficult day, with your mind filled with fears about the future. The idea that everything is impermanent offers a new perspective. It may be that the pain or anxiety you are feeling right now is just a temporary phase, one that will eventually dissipate, like rain disappearing when the sky clears. The difficult situation does not last forever, just as good moments do not. True wisdom lies in accepting this impermanence. By doing so, we can realize that many of our worries are related to something that won't last. A practical example of this is the way we handle difficulties at work. Perhaps you are worried about an important meeting or a challenging project, but over time, you realize that specific situation will lose its significance. The very moment of tension will dissolve, and the mind will find a new focus. This leads us to a fundamental question. Why do we create so much anxiety thinking about the future, when we know nothing is permanent? Often, our minds act as if the challenges that arise now are unchangeable, as if they are a fixed reality. But in truth, these challenges are also in a state of transformation. Over time, if you can look at situations through the eyes of impermanence, you'll realize they do not have the power to consume your energy forever. The acceptance of impermanence is liberating. It reminds us that suffering, just like joy, does not last forever. Every moment, whether good or bad, has a determined time to pass. This doesn't mean we should neglect the difficulties of life, but rather, we should learn to face them with a perspective of acceptance. By doing this, our minds are freed from the weight of an unchangeable future, allowing us to live more fully in the present. Now that we understand how impermanence can transform our view of worrying, let's explore another equally powerful concept from Eastern philosophy: detachment. The power of detachment. In the Western world, we are often taught to value possession, control, and the relentless pursuit of security. We are constantly reminded that we must fight, conquer, and hold on to the things we deem important. However, Eastern philosophy, especially Taoism and Buddhism, offers us a different perspective, the concept of detachment. What does detachment really mean? Detachment does not mean abandoning everything we love or that is important to us. According to Eastern philosophy, detachment is the ability to free ourselves from the need to control circumstances and people. It is about accepting that, just like situations and emotions, material possessions are also transient. When we cling too much to what we have, to the image we want to build, or to what we possess, we create an emotional dependence that often fuels our worries. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, in his Tao Te Ching, reminds us, "He who knows that enough is enough will always have enough." This teaching brings a great truth. Our constant need for more, for control, for ensuring that everything goes our way only increases our anxiety. When we become attached to the idea that we need something to be happy or successful, we are setting ourselves up for frustration because nothing in the world is permanent. The practice of detachment teaches us that true freedom comes from accepting the impermanence of things. Imagine a scenario where you are no longer a slave to the fear of losing something important, whether it's a job, a relationship, or even a life ideal. Imagine a state where you could enjoy what you have without the need to hold on to it tightly, knowing that, if it leaves, you will be able to move on. Detachment is not about giving up the things we love, but about learning to love them without the fear of losing them. This doesn't mean we should be indifferent or uninterested, but rather that we should learn to enjoy the present without the burden of fear about the future. When we stop worrying excessively about what might happen and learn to free ourselves from the need to control everything around us, our anxieties begin to diminish. Detachment is not about renouncing our dreams, but about learning to live with the certainty that, whatever happens, we will be able to deal with it. Practicing detachment is liberating because it allows us to see life with more lightness. When we stop carrying the weight of constant control, we can begin to appreciate things for their own beauty, without the pressure of owning them or keeping them. By letting go of excessive worrying about the future and the things we cannot control, we can finally live with more peace and tranquility. Now that we understand the power of detachment, let's explore the role of acceptance in alleviating our worries. The role of acceptance in alleviating worries. When we talk about accepting impermanence and detachment, we come to a crucial point in the journey of self-awareness: acceptance. Acceptance is often misunderstood. It does not mean resignation or passivity in the face of life, but rather an active stance of recognizing reality as it is, without constantly trying to shape it to our will. In many Eastern philosophies, such as Buddhism, acceptance is seen as one of the keys to inner peace. But what exactly does it mean to accept something without fighting against it? Acceptance is, in fact, one of the greatest acts of courage we can perform. It means looking at our emotions, our difficulties, and even our failures with compassion, without judgment, and without the need to change everything at all costs. Imagine you are facing a difficult situation, such as a loss or a disappointment. Often, our first reaction is to resist the pain, try to ignore it, or find quick ways to escape from it. However, this resistance creates more suffering. True acceptance comes when we stop fighting what is happening and simply allow the experience to unfold. Modern psychology, especially acceptance and commitment therapy argues that acceptance is not about agreeing with a situation but about recognizing that it exists and is part of our human experience. Instead of trying to avoid pain or frustration, we accept it as part of the process of living. This idea also connects with the teachings of Carl Jung, who talks about the importance of confronting our shadow, the parts of ourselves that we try to repress or ignore. Accepting the shadow, or the parts of ourselves we do not like, is a key step in individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are. When we resist our shadow, what causes us discomfort, we perpetuate anxiety and fear. However, by accepting it, we begin to integrate these parts into our wholeness. For example, when we face a challenging situation at work, such as a conflict with a colleague, resistance can lead us to act defensively or reactively, creating more tension. But if we manage to accept the situation as it is, with calm and clarity, we have the opportunity to act more balanced, without being controlled by our impulsive emotions. This acceptance does not mean that we should passively accept all the conditions in our lives, but rather that we should accept what is happening now so we can act with more wisdom. We cannot change what has already passed, but we can accept it and make more conscious decisions for the future. Acceptance is not synonymous with giving up, but with letting go of control. By accepting circumstances as they are, we can, paradoxically, gain more control over how we react to them. Acceptance frees us from the burden of constant resistance, allowing us to live more lightly and peacefully. When we focus on acceptance, our minds find space to quiet down. When we accept something, it is no longer spending energy on resistance, and instead, we can focus on acting in a more constructive and fulfilling way. Now that we understand the power of acceptance, let's explore how the practice of mindfulness can be a key tool in freeing ourselves from constant worries. Finding peace by stopping the struggle with worries. Throughout this video, we explored the foundations of Eastern philosophies on detachment, acceptance, and mindfulness. We saw how constantly fighting against what we cannot control fuels our worries, and how the practice of detachment can free us from the prison of mental suffering. First, we reflected on the idea of impermanence. Worries often arise because we try to hold on to what is transient or controllable, something we can never truly manage. By embracing impermanence, we understand that everything has its time and place, and what causes us anxiety today will eventually pass. Next, we discussed acceptance not as passivity, but as an active movement of surrendering to what is, without fighting the inevitable. Acceptance, as Jung teaches us, is the key to integrating our shadow and advancing on the path of individuation. By accepting reality fully, we gain control over our reactions and, consequently, over our worries. Finally, the practice of mindfulness proved to be a powerful tool to interrupt the cycle of constant rumination. When we can focus on the present moment, we free our minds from the weight of worries about the future and regrets of the past. True peace begins with the ability to be present, and mindfulness allows us to do just that. As we conclude, it's important to remember that it's not about eradicating worries or life's challenges. They are part of the human experience. What we can control, however, is how we respond to them. Detachment, acceptance, and mindfulness offer us the power to change our relationship with worries, allowing us to live more lightly, more consciously, and ultimately, more peacefully. This is the invitation that Eastern philosophies and deep psychology extend to us, to learn to let go of control, embrace the flow of life, and find true peace within ourselves. Now, with these tools in hand, the journey is yours. What will you choose to do with them?